Mhm. Dear colleagues, dear friends, I'm happy to see you this August day, and I'm happy to start our new season of International Philosophical Seminar Postscriptum with the meeting with the very, very special guest. And I'm grateful to Svetlana Belinchenko for organizing of this event, for this cooperation, collaboration. And maybe I would like to maybe propose to Svetlana and Christy to tell about this meeting before our meeting, few words, and we will start.
I'm delighted to present Christy Rhodes. She's associate professor of adult education and the director of everything is, in my opinion. Well, she's president of Coalition of Lifelong Learning Organizations, director of Commission of International Adult Education, co-editor-in-chief, New Directions for Adult and Continuing Education. And I'm just delighted to present the topic. I think it would be really fruitful for our discussion. It's on cultural identity theory, and it will be described as a useful lens to examine diversity and inclusion. Christy, the floor is yours.
Thank you.
And
As I
then
know, Svetlana, you met Christy on some conference or
yeah,
maybe.
yeah, we met at a summer institute in Augsburg this summer in June, and maybe it was the start of our cooperation. And I hope that it will be more than this event. That will have a lot of more meetings. Yeah.
Absolutely. So I thanks to all of you for again for taking your Friday afternoon after the beginning of a semester to spend time with us. I'm honored really to share a little bit of what I have been examining and thinking about and implementing into my teaching and research for quite a while now. And that is looking at cultural identity and how just how it affects all of our lives, but our interactions with others and with people. So let's see. I'm going to, before I share, well, I'll share and I will tell you. I teach online, so I'm used to doing this, but inevitably my screens will get mixed up. So please give me 1 minute to make sure I share the right screen with you. That's always the moment, isn't it, of truth? Okay, I think that will work. And
Mhm.
haha, that is good.
We can see it.
You can see it and you can't see my notes, which is the better part of that. Um, so everyone, right now, I cannot see you. Um, I can only see my notes. So please, if you have a question, just interrupt me, right? If something pops up, please just interrupt. So let's get rolling. So much to talk about today. So as Svetlana mentioned, cultural identity and cultural identity theory and the framework is going to be some of our most of what we hopefully dialogue about today. I will send this PowerPoint to you so you have more time to read this quote from Bell Hooks, an incredible theorist within educational theory who we adore. Okay, so that's me. And as I said, today we'll look at cultural identity. We'll also discuss a little bit this concept of intersectionality. Um, and I will at the very end share, and it will be up to you how much I share or not. Um, again, mm, as Svetlana said, I'm an associate professor in a master's program of adult education. So most of my thinking and my focus tends to be on helping people become better at helping adults learn, right, in a variety of formal and informal learning environments. So that tends to be where I focus, but from what I understand, we are probably, you are more interested in talking a little bit less of the applied and more of the theoretical today. So we'll see if I can balance that. And if not, you just tell me. So to get rolling, right, let us make sure we're all on the same page. There are some wonderful definitions and very important terms and concepts that introduce us, right, to thinking about cultural identity and how it affects us. So from point one, right, for the first step, I guess is to really think about what we mean when we talk about culture, right? Um, and also a kind of the importance of it, okay? In this framework, there is a major assumption that culture and really cultural identities, the plural nature of that, there is a belief that everything, every part of that influences every part of how we see the world, how we interact with the world. And obviously the world includes those people that we are also interacting with. So that webs of significance, right? Like a cobweb. I love that term, right? Um, but it's a great way if you think of it as like that cobweb that you see through. And that is, I'm referencing Clifford Geertz's description of culture and how he described it. But again, it's how we make, first, how we perceive, right? And then also how we make meaning of our world, right? Through those webs, okay? And as you can imagine, everyone's web is unique and different. For example, some parts of those webs I've mentioned here are our values, right? Our language or languages, our beliefs, and how we believe we should behave, right? And what's appropriate. So to continue thinking about that, okay, and culture and what it means to this topic, you if we just expand it now and acknowledge that there are different groups, right? We are in different groups. So right now we're stepping into that idea that not everyone is the same. to state something incredibly obvious, okay? And within those different subgroups, right, members will share. There are certain worldviews within that group that group members share, right? So think of those as like the basics, I guess, or the starting points, okay? So again, we can think about how within a cultural group that we identify with and we are a member of, wow, yeah, we all kind of see that in the same way, right? So the starting point is the same. What else should we say about culture? Well, and I think not to state what is obvious to all of us, but culture has it's really funny when you start to think about culture, we quickly think of those superficial aspects, right? Oh, what food I like, what language I speak, right? Um, but we really want to keep in our minds that the vast majority, the most profound part of our cultural identities really are deep and they are unseen. Um, and honestly, they are probably unknown to us, to ourselves, until we come into contact with someone from a, a, a different identity, right? So that's really our starting point for talking about diversity, right? Yeah, and I've been throwing this word cultural identity around. My apologies for not defining it first. Um, but as you can see, we now use the word cultural identities more frequently. That's a development because it's an acknowledgement that it's in the US, we have predominant, or the field in the US has really developed around racial identity and ethnic identity and gender identity, excuse me. But we now acknowledge that those are that the variety, the breadth and scope of our identities is incredibly extensive. So using that plural. So again, so it's not just about one aspect of who we are. So as in this group of esteemed scholars, we do need to talk theory, right? So and excuse me if you are already familiar with this. If you, for example, come from the field of sociology, that's really the predominant group that started looking at and developing cultural identity theory. They come out of the field of sociology and psychology as well, and critical theory, but I get ahead of myself. Okay? But it is a relatively young theory. So we can trace that back to around the 1980s. At the risk of showing my age, I will tell you, to me, that seems like just yesterday. But it grew from this realization or this acknowledgement from within sociology that what is the relationship between how I feel about who I am, right? And then that relationship about how I feel about who I am, how in concerning then how other people think about me, and then how does that affect how I feel I am? Right? And that confusion. So anyway, that is kind of those were the questions that were starting to be asked that within the development of this theory. There was an awareness that somehow we're communicating, right? People are communicating, and they just didn't quite know how. They wanted to understand that process of communicating what group I'm in, what group you're not in, right? The in group and the out group, who is the other. Another question that early theorists also wanted to examine and understand better is how, and the word that we use is salience. And for some reason, I absolutely love that word. You can tell I was a language teacher for many years, so words have a special flavor for me sometimes, a special significance. So salience just sums this up so quickly, it's so well, because that is how important that particular identity is at a certain point, right? Inherent to all of this is our cultural identities are fluid and dynamic, right? And how important they are at one point might change. If you don't mind, I'd love to give you an example. For example, when in the 90s, I took a contract teaching in the Middle East, in the United Arab Emirates. And I had, up to that point, never really looked at or questioned at all my religious identity. I grew up in this Protestant church. I went, but I hadn't really questioned any of that. Arriving in the Middle East, I was perceived by those who were not from my background, right, from Emiratis and the locals in that area. They saw me as a particular type of Christian, and they had many assumptions about what that meant and what it meant I believed in and what I did every day and how I interacted. So up till that point, religious identity had not been salient to me. It hadn't been important. It was coming into contact with people who had a different view of who I was than from what I had inside yeah, that the salience quickly changed and it became more important. So I guess that perhaps that's another reason why we don't know sometimes which of our identities will become more important and prominent. So again, just to kind of sum my very long-winded story about that. So cultural identities, the importance of them, a key part of cultural identity theory is the idea that they will vary, they will change, they will vary depending on the context we're in, the time, and also who you're interacting with, okay? Either in group or out group. Anything else we should say or talk about with theory? I guess just a little bit of a summarizing statement, or as I say it in my head, a key takeaway. If I had to describe it in one or two brief sentences, I would say so. Cultural identity is really is reflection of how others see us and then how we perceive how others see us. Right? So again, thinking of that in-group and out-group theory and idea. It is constantly evolving. Our identities, we've already said, they're constantly evolving, really shifting our understanding of who we are in relationship to others within our group, and also those outside of our group. So I hope that is I've done a very quick job of kind of going over the basics of this incredible theory. So maybe we can have some questions and talk about it a little bit later. But for now, I'll move on to two other terms that came from later development within cultural identity theory. And that was roughly around the 2000s. Okay? Critical theorists, right? And we know that critical theorists, their first position, right, on when assessing and looking at ideas is thinking about the role of power in a situation, who has power, what's the motivation to act, and or shall I say, how actors are maintaining power and how are they behaving to retain power. Yeah, so critical theorists stepped in and said, this is a lovely idea to just think about how I feel about myself and how my perception of how others feel about me. However, it's key to understand that within society, certain groups are valued more than others, right? Not that they're legitimizing that, but they're critical of the fact that is involved. So our critical theorists brought some of those ideas and questions into cultural identity theory. Okay? And the result for one of the results was this acknowledgement of the term intersectionality, like an intersection on the street, right, where roads come together. What had been happening, particularly in the US, and not only in the theory and what our theorists were seeing, but how their words were being taken and being implemented, particularly in our school system and our teacher prep programs, it was then, oh, okay, so if I get this cultural identity theory, all I need to do then is like, if I have students from, in the US, we would say Latino or Hispanic background, well, I just have to learn everything about them as one monolithic group, right? So I have a young student, I've read about this, I know how to work with that student, okay? Well, thankfully, our critical theorists said, hey, hold on, because not only do we have an ethnic identity, perhaps a national identity, a gender identity, etc. We have all of those, and they interact to create individual experiences. So intersectionality, you will hear a lot, And it's just about that unique lived experience. It is another reason why we no longer in our teacher education programs give like info about certain groups, right? If you have a student from this background, this is what the student will do. We know that is not accurate anymore. So let us move on to the other term. And just to throw it out, you're probably, again, already familiar with it, but the idea of normativity and norms, right? What is normal? I guess I always think it helps to think of it, right? So in society, so again, realizing cultural identity theory comes from our sociologists. Thank you very much. So that idea of within society, there are norms, right? So this is considered on a wide scale, generally a good thing to do or a bad thing to do, right? We do have those societal norms. Within normativity, okay, taking it down a little bit more micro, okay, that there are implications from those from minority or smaller cultural groups, right? Because what is considered the norm within their group may or may not also be reflected in the larger societal norm. So, yeah. So I guess another to kind of sum that up and why that is so important in cultural identity theory is we to keep in mind that according to this, we humans, right, we are always unconsciously evaluating our distance from the norm, right? And in that process, other things happen that influences how that shapes our behavior and our thoughts and our values in different ways. Okay, so that is the kind of really the end of the terminology. Okay? What I would like to do, if it's okay with you, I'm going to stop sharing for a moment and just come back to the group. I have other information, but so far, what questions, what thoughts, what would you like to share about the topic, if anything?
Oh.
You're free to write in the chat window too. I'll open up my chat. Any thoughts? Olga, I see Olga Gomilko. It's a pretty name.
Yeah, right. The first question, what came to my mind at the beginning of the introduction of your subject, is the difference between personal identity and cultural identity. Of course, I realize personal, it's what I am, how I perceive myself. But you mentioned that this is this question, and this is the issue how I perceive myself depends on how others perceive me, yeah? And just what do you see the correlations, or maybe what's the you know the how do you see the difference between personal and cultural identity? Very, in the key of this question, because it's understandable in general, but within the cultural identity theory.
Wonderful, wonderful question, Olga. And before I start talking, does anyone else want to offer their ideas in answer to Olga? Can I say one more thing too? If anyone wants to share their questions and comments and thoughts in another language, please do so. I'm sure somebody else will translate it back for me, but if that's more comfortable, please do that too. So does anyone have a thought for our colleague, Professor Olga? If I can. So I think, and I hope I've understood correctly, yeah, but please tell me if I have not. I think it's important to remember with all of what I've been talking about right now, that this comes from the field of sociology, right? So again, right? So they are looking at that larger grouping of people, right? Society and groups. And I would also say, and I haven't mentioned much, but the field of psychology also interacts quite often, right, in this framework. And so, in essence, we really have that combination of looking at the individual, but all of that examination of the individual is always centered or focused on their relationship to others, if I'm making sense. So for example, and that's where we kind of separate from the psychological, I guess. So yes, as an individual, I have my personal being, yeah, but we're using that term cultural identities to really talk about the group identities that I experience. And if you don't mind, I'll give you a personal example. In the US, or in academia in the US, probably about 5 years ago, 6 years ago, we noticed, and I was very happy with this advancement. There was an acknowledgement of we should never assume, right? Because that word assume is always so big, right? We should never assume that how we should refer to someone, or how in terms of their gender, right? We don't know. We always want to simply check, right? No assumptions. So what you would see, just a little thing in our emails, for example, at the university, we still do. You put your preferred pronouns, right? So let me, and I don't want to get too off topic, but interestingly, there's always resistance, right? When you're pushing kind of our boundaries and expanding what we understand, I guess, as a unique group identity. And the fact, the nature that identities are fluid, right, and can change. But there was some resistance, right? So for example, I happen to be, I was assigned female at birth. I present, that's the word we use. We say, I present as female. So very few people would question, right? Like, oh, that's Christy. She's a woman, right? I know what pronouns to use. However, so there's a lot of pushback, like, oh, you should only put it if you think people are not going to understand, or they're going to misuse. Eventually, there was a realization of no, because that puts the onus, that puts the burden on the minority, right, to proclaim that identity. So I don't want to get too far off topic, but that I think is perhaps an example of how it is for cultural identity theory. The realization is everything is about my individual behavior and values and thinking and how I interact. However, all of what we do is in some way influenced by how I think others will react to me, right? For when I'm enacting that aspect of who I am. Did that answer the question, Olga? Did that answer it, or would you like to follow up?
To some extent, because there is no understanding the border. This is yeah, and that's why it's another question. What constructs this personal space, your even personal field of identity? what is allowed, yeah, by society, by values, by all this, and what depends on your own, choice and would be recognized in society.
Oh, that is wonderful. And I won't even attempt to answer it, but I will say that your comments are an acknowledgement of the messiness, right? That this is not a clear, right? As I said, one of the true tenets is these ideas, who we are changes and is flexible and becomes different and right? And there are some people and there are some parts of us that don't change, right? So so that messiness is probably kind of one of the, I'm just going to say it, the interesting but the challenging parts of how we implement that in our work, in our, right? So yeah. So that was not a very good answer, but
but to add it, the question of normativity, very important.
Absolutely. And that is where that it's not a comfortable, like, ooh, so is there a line where, yes, so totally agreed. And it will lead to many other great discussions, I hope, amongst the group. Any other thoughts or comments?
There was a question in chat.
Oh, let's see. Oh, so Elaine said, and I hope you're home now, Elaine, because you said you were driving. How do you describe the relationship between historical identity and cultural identity? Oh, that's fascinating. So I'm going to give you the textbook answer, but I think as a group we might want to explore it a little bit more. So textbook answer is so cultural identities, we have come, the theory has come to the place where we need a better word, quite frankly, because when we think culture, we think of just a few different things, right? We think of, oh, our nationality, our ethnicity, but truly, when I am using the term and current theorists, when they use the term, they are saying cultural identities in that very big way. And within that, we have your identity related to your religion, related to your gender, related to, and that I'm coming to it, I swear, in a minute with this historical identity. One of the areas that is now that I've begun to focus on, for example, is your location. So are you rural versus urban, right? And how that is an aspect of our identity that actually we cling to, and that it can determine some aspects of how we talk to others, who we talk to, and what we talk about. So just to give you an example, Elaine had asked about historical identity. I will tell you, I'm not quite sure what that would be and what that would mean. Would anyone like to share that or their ideas of kind of how would that be a group identity? I think I know what you're talking about, but I don't want to assume. So would anyone else like to, perhaps it's something somewhat and sadly and unfortunately unique to what is happening in Ukraine right now.
And if I may, maybe just me, but I have a sort of contradiction when we combine cultural and physical aspects. So it's problematic for me. I saw it in some slides. It's problematic for me uh, to link cultural identity with ability and disability, with such an outdated, it's just for me a concept of race. So how can we perceive physical aspects as cultural identity? So what is the argument?
I'll tell you the argument. I won't say if I agree or disagree, right? But I will tell you the argument that cultural identity theorists would use. They would say very simply, that aspect of their life, that physical aspect, influences how they see the world, how the world sees them, and how people interact with them, and how they, and if they are valued, if they are not, etc. So that's the rationale for it. Any other thoughts on that? It's a really good one. Okay, so the historical identity, perhaps we can continue to think about that one. I'm guessing that would be that a group experiences the same historical events or yeah, and I unfortunately the only thing that is coming to my mind right now are traumatic events. Um, um, and then that creates, in that case though, it would shape your values, your behaviors, your thoughts, but would you be able to unexperience it? Would you be able to not be part of that subgroup? Like, oh, well, that's a good one. Oh, anyway. Any other thoughts before we go on? We're going to be very applied, and it's only going to be about 5 more minutes. So, any other more deeper, more thought-provoking thoughts that anyone wants to share? Okay. So the next stage, and I will share again. Whoops, if I don't touch the wrong button. One of the beautiful things of teaching online and all of that we know that came out of COVID was how the need to have double monitors, at least again, because all of my teaching is online. Sometimes that is even more problematic because there are just too many buttons. But before I go back to sharing then, so to give you a quick trailer like we do in the movie theater. Next is going to be, I'm going to talk about a framework of how we interact with adults, specifically adult learners, but I tend to think of this in general as a societal kind of the way we interact with others in general. So without further ado, let us make sure I can share again. Get rid of the chat. Okay, have I done it correctly? I hope so. So again, thank you. Thank you very, very, very much for that discussion. There we go. So this is a very big and again, quite popular up until the recent administration. This was an area that was really getting developed and there was a lot of talk about culturally inclusive or culturally relevant or culturally responsive. There are a few terms, and it depends on the development of that theory. But it is related to the idea that who we are and who our learners are affects how they perceive. Remember that idea of that culture, our webs of significance affects how we perceive the world and then how we think it perceives that whole interaction. Culturally inclusive teaching does the same. Just want to share one interesting little, so again, I was a language teacher, so a lot of my research has been done with language teachers, and no surprise here, teachers and students notice cultural identities of their learners in class. Those that are visible, okay, or those that students will share, right? Remember, not all are visible. So not a surprise. I found this fascinating. Teachers, because this can be very good, or there can be some problematic parts of this too, that teachers did change how they taught and the strategies they used, depending on what they perceived to be the backgrounds of their students. So again, we don't have time today, but that's a fascinating topic. Okay, so very, very quickly. This is Marjorie Ginsburg and I forgot Fledkowski's first name. How embarrassing. Raymond, there we go. Marjorie Ginsburg and Raymond Vladkowski looked around and said all of this wonderful theory about incorporating the idea of cultural identity into our teaching. We have all this good work about primary classrooms, secondary classrooms, but we didn't have a framework that was really unique to what happens when we work with adults, right? Our higher education, our continuing education, etc. So they came up with this. I am not, well, I'll show you. So I just wanted to briefly share with you the elements that they included, because I think it's just an interesting idea, and at another time I hope we could get into more details. But the motivational framework, okay, starts from the point that says, when learners, adult learners, come into the classrooms, we want to make sure that we're creating the most motivational, inclusive, comfortable environment for those learners. Because if not, then those learners who are going to want to stay in those classes, right? They don't have they can, maybe they can or cannot move, but we want them to spend their energy on the learning and not on the accommodating things and changing their ways of behavior within the norms, though, back to what Olga was saying, within certain norms, right? But we don't want them to have to spend all of that extra energy figuring out what the teacher means, right? And because they might be communicating or expressing things in a different way. So they said there are 4 things that we should always be talking about, 4 elements, okay? And the first, and I say first, second, third, fourth, there is no order to these. They're all connected. Establishing inclusion. So what are we doing to make sure that everyone in that room, in that class, in that meeting, okay, feels included, okay, and heard and seen. The other, okay, the next one, they said, you know, if you give adults choice and you make sure that what is happening in that meeting, class, etc., is relevant to their lives, okay, then you will help them develop a positive attitude towards the task, towards the work that you're going to be doing, if it's a class, if it's again, a meeting, etc. Okay. They also then said, in addition, another aspect to make sure that we are creating these inclusive environments is think about ways that you can enhance the meaning for everyone in that room, right? Everyone that's involved in that interaction. So create some challenge for them and create engagement. And last but not least is about those, right? Teachers, we know assessment is an important piece of what we do. So this last one about engendering or creating competence, right, is a push for all of us to look at the ways that we allow learners to show that they have achieved, that they have learned the task at hand. And really rethinking, is it an authentic assessment, right? Is it an effective, right? Is it tied to our learning objectives rather than just, well, we always ask them to write an essay, so let's just keep doing it, right? Let's assess their learning that way. We could spend days, weeks, literally talking about those. I think since time is running away from us, what I will do, I'll just, let me make sure I'm on the right scene. Let me go back for a second. Okay. So I'm not going to talk about these, but I'll leave them up for a few minutes. Okay, that is, again, establishing inclusion, and those are some practices. Again, those are some specific practices involved in how you develop a positive attitude towards the task or the learning that will go on. Remember, this was about critical, right? Like being more deeper and having students get more involved and more engaged, right? And finally, this was the assessment piece, right? So how do you kind of make sure that when you are checking to see if learners have learned how, right? And that whole process of giving feedback, etc. And so again, we didn't spend much time on those, but in the future, I would love to talk about that. Okay? Perhaps, unless you have another question, this is kind of as we sum things up and we kind of wrap things up, right, in a little bow, as I would say. So I guess I was wondering if you wanted to share. So this idea of different identities and different parts of who they are, how in your classrooms, how, what are your students demonstrating now? Okay, so I will stop sharing. So yeah, and just kind of your experience with your university students in terms of what's salient and what's important to them now. Any thoughts, any ideas you'd like to share?
Just
Please,
very,
please.
very short, if I may. Maybe we have a very special teaching experience. After the COVID time, the full-scale war started. And, this is almost 5 years.
Jeez.
It lasts 5 years. That's why our experience, but what I would say from my experience that on the one hand, of course, people are students are very dispersed because it's online, uh, studying and teaching, and that's why there is some specific of communicated. You don't have the, direct access to their, identity. It's a very partial. But
Absolutely.
what I would say that they are more united now in terms of
Mm.
language identity, cultural identity, because history, language, religious is the part of the cultural identity. That's why, from my point of view, there is no such a very, acute problem in terms of inclusion,
Mm.
something, because
Mm.
now all of us, all of us, not only students, are united by the one,
Yeah. Yeah.
idea and wish and dream, and just to have peace and to end the war. But to end the war, on the, just basis, and to survive. And I'm talking a lot, but there is a very, very short expression of our wish to survive as a
Mm.
nation, as a culture, and and the cultural identity.
Absolutely.
And that's why, of course, there are more technical problems in my teaching, but not in cultural
Mm.
identity, to find some way to how to reconcile or how to find approaches. Just even as you mentioned, traumatic experience is important when students are losing their friends,
Yeah.
parents, close people. And this is the issue, of course, how to deal
Absolutely.
with this problem.
Thank you, Olga. Would anyone like to add to what Professor Olga has shared with us? Or have you had something different?
I have a remark. Maybe we have. I thought about the aspects. Maybe we have one aspect of inclusion to be considered. It's a visibility balance, visibility problem. For instance, before 2022, there was a clear undervisibility of the internally displaced persons because they were in the communities for which the war hasn't started yet. And since 2014, there were about 8 years of this experience disparity in the communities. But I can absolutely agree that after the full-scale invasion, the disparity is leveled a bit. So the visibility of the internally displaced person is better, but sadly, not because it became better due to awareness, but because there are 5 more million of internally displaced persons. That's my realistic experience as such. And I have a question maybe to Krita and to all other participants about the visibility balance. What should we do? What should we do? Or if is it possible to balance between over visibility of some groups, which is harmful, and under visibility of some group, which is harmful as well? It maybe it concerns any cultural group that we consider in danger or isolated. Over visibility and under visibility can harm equally. What should we do? Should we do to balance visibility?
Oh, Svetlana, what a great question. I'm going to turn it over to our to us as the group. Who would like to offer a thought to that really heavy, important question? Please don't be shy. And you can answer in whatever language you want. Remember that.
We started our discussion at the time of the talking of Christy. Thank you so much for your brilliant presentation. And baby, do you have question, remarks? I would like to ask you before our meeting, I talk about this idea of our not idea, maybe it's some instruction from Ministry of Education to choose one or two teacher from the faculty who will be responsible, first of all, for inclusive education, and soon we have a special seminars and instruction on this term. And second one, to choose one or two teachers who will be responsible for special adult education, especially for students who returned from the traumatized, maybe with some, who returned from the army, from the front. And in this no, can you comment, for example, this, and maybe is it possible to became quickly specialist in such kind of direction, very maybe I don't know how to tell. Is it possible, first of all, to have a very soon some skills? Or second one, maybe what do you think generally? What does it mean adult education? Questions, structure of this in your country, what who are adult, what kind of education your learners wish, for example, is it free choice or maybe it's insist? And for us, do you see it's new possibilities for soldiers or anywhere who returned from the front? They have to change the previous experience and job, and it's adult education now. I agree with Olga. We have a maybe special content of general terms, adult, if, uh, some learning at the time of the life in our situation. There might be some spontaneous notes. How can you comment?
So two quick thoughts. Again, I love that expression in English about off the top of my head, right? Because very often off the top of my head doesn't, I'm better at giving a little time to process. However, off the top of my head, one of back to Svetlana and your earlier question, Inna, there is a growing, and it's a good, again, a positive advancement in our teacher ed preparation of actually incorporating, they're calling it, naming it, trauma-informed teaching. Acknowledging that there are various traumas that our students are experiencing, and they are different, right? But traumas, not little, anyway, but true traumas, and how we as educators can facilitate to make sure that those students, those learners, can continue learning to the best that they can, right? So I'm going to gather some of that info and share it back with you, if you don't mind. It's been fascinating, and truthfully, it's only been within the last 4 years. The other thing, about adult learning, and particularly about the return of your veterans, right? Your soldiers who are coming back from the front lines. And unfortunately, in the US, we do have that experience, not on our own land, but we have sent soldiers to places for quite a few years now, and they do come back with unique needs, right? I will say adult ed as a field has been somewhat helpful in helping that transition. Okay? But there is much more room for it, I guess. That was a terrible answer. Again, that was off the top of my head. But how about I do this? Only because I'm looking at my clock and saying, oof, it's almost 11 o'clock for me, which means 6 o'clock for you. I promise you, if we could have another conversation, I would absolutely love to have that about adult and adult learning, and kind of how that can be enhanced, if that's okay with you.
Thank you. We'll stay in touch.
And thank you. I have to thank all of you. I do. I don't use the word, I feel this is an honor. I don't do that lightly, but I truly feel honored to have been invited to speak with all of you today. And I hope we will be back in touch soon. And Svetlana, my friend, thank you. We will be back in touch. And if you don't mind, I'm going to go to another meeting now, which, well, we know nothing will be as good as this was today. So thank you so much for allowing me to join you today. Thank you.
Thank you, dear Christy.